Well, we begin your news today with Puerto Rico's Department of Education announcing they will start testing their students to avoid an increase in COVID-19 cases. It's just one way to try and keep those kids in class for the majority of the year. Our Christian Ramos has the story.
As a result of the increase in pediatric COVID-19 cases in Puerto Rico, the local Department of Education announced that they will be aleatory testing students to minimize outbreaks and infections in schools as part of the preventive efforts carried out together with the Department of Health. The decision comes as Puerto Rico registered an increase in infections in children from 0 to 9 years old for whom vaccination has not been authorized. In the last week, more than 400 positive cases were reported between those ages. According to the Secretary of Education, Ramos, by doing the proper testing and tracing, the department will be able to respond quickly to possible infections or outbreaks between students. However, Ramos explained that they need the parents to collaborate because the process could not start if they do not authorize their children to be tested. Some schools have already obtained 100% of the authorization, but there are others in which only 50% of the parents have agreed. 2 weeks ago, around 751 public schools started in-person education after more than a year of being virtual. Since then, at least 278 cases of COVID-19 have been reported between students, 97 between school personnel, and 64 classrooms have been closed. Reporting from San Juan, Puerto Rico, Christian Ramos.
Well, hospitals in Cuba have started running low on beds, and doctors are grappling with shortages of medicine, oxygen, and other critical supplies. Well, now some doctors are taking an unprecedented step, using social media to criticize the government's handling of the pandemic. Patrick Ottman reports from Havana.
During the first months of the pandemic, Cuban healthcare workers received applause every night. Cuba's government calls the doctors and nurses heroes in white coats and sends them to work in countries around the world to earn the hard currency that the communist-run island desperately needs. But as Cuba's socialist healthcare system faces shortages of medicine and hospitals are overwhelmed by COVID, tensions have emerged between the government and the doctors and nurses they usually praise. During a visit to a province hard hit by COVID in August, Cuba's prime minister said healthcare workers there had committed errors and were undisciplined. There are complaints about lack of medicine, he said, but they are less than the complaints of mistreatment, of neglect, or that doctors don't make visits. That's incredible. The backlash across the island from some Cuban healthcare workers was swift and unprecedented. We are demanding the minimum conditions to offer decent care to our patients and healthcare workers, this doctor said. More than 36 doctors and nurses have posted videos to social media saying the government's pandemic response is failing. We want to keep working. We want to keep saving lives, says this doctor. We are not responsible for the sanitary collapse in our country. The Cuban government says the doctors are being used for, quote, new enemy campaigns, but has recognized the healthcare system is at its limits. For much of the pandemic, Cuba seemed to have the spread of the coronavirus under control, but then in late 2020, the island reopened borders without first requiring travelers to have a PCR test before arrival. Now with the Delta variant, the number of cases and deaths are skyrocketing. Cuba turned down offers from other countries to send vaccines, instead developing their own. We trust 100% in our vaccine candidates, she says. The numbers of cases that we have today, in a few months, our vaccine candidates will show that they are effective and the situation will improve. So far, more than 30% of the island is completely vaccinated, according to the health ministry. The government predicts they will vaccinate every Cuban by the end of the year. Despite the massive effort, cases and deaths remain at an all-time high. For the rebellious Cuban healthcare workers who have spoken out against their government's handling of the pandemic, even if the vaccines succeed, it is already too late. Patrick Ottman, CNN Havana.
Well, in more pandemic-related news, a curfew now in effect in Grenada and will stay in place for 2 weeks as authorities there try and deal with a surge in COVID cases. That curfew took effect over the weekend. It also includes some non-movement days from September 10th to the 13th, and then again from September 17th to the 20th. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Mitchell announced the measures, saying the COVID situation had deteriorated on the island over the past couple of weeks and said it cannot be business as usual.
Daily statistics from the Ministry of Health show that we have moved from the occasional identification of positive cases to daily additions of new cases, sometimes in excess of 100 per day. The medical experts have confirmed that we are now at the stage of community spread. The number of confirmed cases of COVID-19 is now nearing 1,000, with more than 600 active cases. All social activities, sporting events and weddings have been suspended also. Funerals are permitted but are restricted to 1 hour between the hours of 9 a.m. to noon. Beach access is limited to 5 to 10 o'clock a.m. daily.
Mitchell also said it's become necessary to implement the closures in non-essential sectors to help limit the movement of people and curb the spread of the virus. That affects daycares, salons, barbershops, gyms, and other indoor entertainment facilities. Schools will also offer virtual classes only. Well, as we continue to watch Hurricane Larry in the Atlantic, Americans are still cleaning up from Ida 1 week after the storm first made landfall there. The exact death toll is still unknown, and it could be weeks until power is restored for some. Mandy Gaither has the latest.
Picking up the pieces.
If you drive around Queens, it looks like a bomb went off.
1 week after Hurricane Ida first made landfall, killing more than a dozen people in Louisiana and Mississippi and causing widespread flooding half a nation away, those in the storm's path still reeling.
Everybody's personal belongings are out on the street. And we've seen what it looks like down south after a hurricane. This is what Queens looks like today. It's horrible.
In the Northeast, the full impact still unknown after Ida unleashed devastating floods. Dozens dead in at least 6 states, more than 24 in New Jersey alone.
The last 4 days have been so devastating to so many families, with more than 130 properties damaged, 35 completely destroyed, families uprooted, infrastructure, affected, poles down.
In Louisiana, some of the hardest hit areas still feeling the heat with no power.
We know there are a lot of people out there who are in fact hurting. Please take advantage of cooling shelters if you can. Run your generators if you have them, but do it safely.
In some areas of the Bayou State, it could be weeks before all power is restored. I'm Mandy Gaither reporting.
Well, just this week, President Joe Biden is expected to travel to New Jersey and New York to see some of that damage firsthand. That'll be his second trip after visiting Louisiana back on Friday. Well, Prince Charles is losing his longest serving and closest aide. His name is Michael Fawcett. He's stepping down as head of the prince's foundation after accusations of misconduct. The Sunday Times reports that Fawcett used his position and influence to help a Saudi businessman obtain an honorary title. The prince's foundation says it takes these allegations very seriously and says that Fawcett stepped down while that matter is under investigation. Fawcett joined the royal service in 1981 as a footman to the Queen. He previously served as the prince's valet, but resigned in 2003 after it was revealed that he bent rules and accepted perks. Well, the FIFA World Cup qualifying match between South American football giants, Brazil and Argentina, had to be stopped just minutes after kickoff. This after Brazilian health officials went onto the field saying that 3 Argentina players who were already on the pitch allegedly broke quarantine rules after visiting the UK. Brazil was already without 9 players for this game. Other South American teams have also lost players due to a decision by some European clubs to really not let their players travel at all.